The living portrait. Scarlett hadn't expected to inherit anything from a distant relative, especially from someone she barely knew. When she received word that her great-aunt had left her something, she was surprised. The delivery arrived on a rainy afternoon, a large painting wrapped in thick, dark fabric. Curiosity piqued. Scarlett carefully unwrapped it. The portrait was of a young woman with a stern expression. Her dark eyes seemed to follow Scarlett wherever she moved, and the detailed painting made the figure look unsettlingly real. The ornate, heavy gold frame added to the painting's antique charm. Although she found the portrait a bit eerie, Scarlett decided to hang it in the living room, believing it held some sentimental and historical value. It was a connection to her family, even if distant. As she hung it on the wall, a chill ran down her spine, as if something inside her resisted the decision. Ignoring the feeling, she went on with her routine. That night, as she tried to relax on the sofa, she couldn't resist glancing repeatedly at the portrait. There was something in the woman's eyes that made her feel uneasy, as if they were actively observing her. She shook her head, brushing off the irrational thought. "It's just a painting," she told herself. Scarlett went to bed, but had a restless sleep. She dreamed of the woman in the portrait staring at her in a disturbing way. When she awoke in the middle of the night, she felt an inexplicable chill and instinctively looked toward her bedroom door, half expecting to see the figure standing there. But of course, there was nothing. The next morning, as she passed through the living room, she noticed something strange. The woman's expression seemed slightly different, softer, almost with the hint of a smile. She dismissed it, convincing herself it was just her imagination playing tricks. But a part of her couldn't ignore the feeling that the portrait was more than it seemed. The look in those eyes made her feel that there was a presence inside the frame, something beyond mere paint on canvas. In the days that followed, even with the painting covered, Scarlett couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. The portrait's unsettling presence seemed to permeate the whole house, making the atmosphere feel heavier. Each day, she felt as though the woman in the portrait was somehow closer, even when she wasn't looking directly at it. One night, as she lay in bed, Scarlett was woken by a strange feeling. This time, she heard no sound, but there was a weight in the air, like someone was standing beside her bed. Turning slowly, she found only darkness, yet the sensation of being watched was undeniable. With her nerves frayed, she uncovered the portrait the next day. What she saw left her speechless. The figure's expression had changed again. Now, beyond the subtle smile, the eyes looked fuller, as though brimming with an emotion Scarlett couldn't identify. A mixture of malice and curiosity, as if the woman were waiting for something. A chill went through her. More disturbing still was that the background of the portrait had changed, too. Where once it had been an indistinct setting, there were now elements that resembled her very own living room. The same window, the same bookshelf. The painting was transforming, reflecting her life in a frightening way. Trying to maintain her sanity, Scarlett began researching the history of the portrait. She turned to old documents and family contacts, seeking any information about her great-aunt and the painting's origins. That's when she uncovered something disturbing. The woman in the portrait was apparently a distant relative who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. No one knew what had happened to her. The painting was the only memory she'd left behind. As her research deepened, Scarlett began to feel a strange connection to the woman in the portrait. It was as if their lives were intertwined, linked by an invisible thread that transcended time. Each night, the painting seemed to come more alive, more aware of her presence, and the line between reality and what was in the frame grew increasingly thin. Scarlett felt as she was being drawn into something far greater, something that threatened not just her sanity, but her very existence. Time was running out. Each night, the portrait grew more disturbing. The woman's face seemed more alive, as if she were trying to break through the boundaries of the painted world and into the real one. The woman's expression now held nothing but malice, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural intensity, and her smile twisted into something sinister. One night, as Scarlett tried to find answers, she noticed something even more terrifying. Passing by a hallway mirror, she saw the portrait's figure reflected behind her, even though the painting itself was still in the living room. Her heart raced, and she was certain now that the painting was trying to invade her life. Unable to sleep, Scarlett spent the night sitting in the living room, watching the portrait, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly, an intense chill filled the room, and the lights flickered before going out completely. In the darkness, Scarlett heard a low, guttural laugh coming from the painting. "You can't stop me," the voice whispered. The figure in the painting seemed to move, as if trying to step out of the frame. Scarlett felt panic take over, but beneath her fear, a growing anger simmered. She knew she couldn't let this entity take her life. "What do you want from me?" Scarlett shouted, her voice echoing in the room. The portrait responded with an even wider smile, eyes gleaming with a sinister light. "I want your life," the voice said. "I want to be where you are." Scarlett, trembling, approached the painting, determined not to give in. "You can't take me away," she said, her voice steady despite the terror. The figure moved once more, and for a moment, Scarlett felt as if she were being pulled into the painting. Her hands gripped the sides of the frame, fighting against an invisible force trying to drag her in. Desperate, she remembered an old diary she had found among her great-aunt's belongings. She ran to her room and retrieved the diary, flipping through it frantically. Inside, she found a passage that mentioned a protective ritual, something that could sever the connection between her and the painting. With the diary in hand, Scarlett returned to the living room. The figure in the painting appeared furious, struggling to escape. Scarlett began to recite the ritual words, focusing on each syllable. A fierce wind filled the room, and the painting began to shake violently. "No!" the voice shouted, but Scarlett continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. The painting glowed intensely, emitting a final silent scream. Scarlett finished the ritual, even as the wind seemed to knock her off her feet. The lights flickered wildly, and the painting shook as if it were trying to free itself one last time. The woman's voice howled in rage, her eyes wide with desperation as the ritual neared completion. As she spoke the final words, a blinding light filled the room. With one last scream, the figure in the painting seemed to be sucked back into the canvas, and then everything was silent. The oppressive feeling vanished, and the woman's image returned to its original expression, as if frozen once more. Scarlett, exhausted and relieved, took the portrait down and threw it into the fireplace. The flames consumed the canvas and frame quickly, turning it into ashes. As she watched the fire extinguish the last remnants of the figure, Scarlett felt an enormous weight lifted from her shoulders. The next day, her home felt different. The air was light, and the feeling of being watched had disappeared. Although the portrait was gone, Scarlett knew the experience would stay with her forever. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had merely contained the presence or sent it somewhere far beyond her reach. Even so, she knew she couldn't risk leaving the portrait intact. She cleaned out the fireplace, ensuring no fragments remained, and made a promise. Never again would she keep a family heirloom without knowing its full history. A new sense of strength filled her. She had confronted something beyond comprehension and had come out victorious. With one last look at the fireplace, she turned away, ready to begin a new phase of her life, free from the shadows the portrait had brought. The old haunted mansion was the center of attention in the small town. Many legends and macabre stories circulated about that place, but the most sinister was that of the cursed portrait. They said that the young woman portrayed, a beautiful woman with deep eyes and an enigmatic smile, had been murdered inside that house, and that her spirit, trapped in the painting, sought revenge through those who dared to look at her for too long. The legend was so ingrained that many avoided even passing in front of the mansion. However, curiosity always overcomes prudence, and a group of young people, defying superstitions, decided to explore the place. Among them was Anna, a young writer fascinated by mystery stories, who believed that the truth behind the legend was more interesting than any fiction. With their hearts racing and adrenaline pumping through their veins, the young people entered the mansion. The rooms were in ruins, covered in cobwebs and dust. At every step, they heard strange noises that made them shudder. But it was upon reaching the main hall that they found what they were looking for: a large portrait hanging on the wall, framed in gold and adorned with precious stones. The woman portrayed seemed to observe them with an intense and defiant gaze. Anna, hypnotized by the beauty of the painting, spent long minutes contemplating the features of the young woman. The other members of the group watched her with concern, reminding her of the legend. But Anna was in a trance, as if she were being sucked into the painting. Suddenly, a shiver ran through her body. The temperature in the room dropped dramatically, and a dense fog began to form around the portrait. The young people huddled together, terrified, as the figure of the woman in the painting began to move. Her eyes shone intensely, and her lips curved into a macabre smile. The painting disintegrated, and the figure of the woman came out of the painting, floating in the air. Her black hair fluttered, and her tattered garments seemed to have come from a nightmare. The young woman, now a specter, directed her gaze at Anna, who felt paralyzed with fear. In a soft and seductive voice, the figure began to speak. "Finally, I have found you. You have set me free." Then, her eyes turned into black slits, and a horrible scream echoed through the mansion. Anna's friends tried to escape, but the spectral figure pursued them, her movements quick and unpredictable. One by one, the young people were dragged into the shadows, disappearing without a trace. Alone and desperate, Anna ran through the dark corridors of the mansion, searching for an escape. But the figure pursued her closely, getting closer and closer. When she was about to be caught, Anna tripped and fell. Looking up, she saw the spectral figure approaching, her eyes fixed on hers. With a final sigh, Anna closed her eyes, awaiting the end. But instead of feeling pain, she felt a strange peace. When she opened them, she was back in the main hall, sitting in front of the portrait. The spectral figure had disappeared, and the painting was intact. Anna got up, confused and terrified. Had it all been a nightmare, or had it been real? Upon leaving the mansion, the young woman decided that she would never return to the place. But the experience marked her forever, and the legend of the cursed portrait continued to haunt her for many years. Years later, Anna became a renowned horror writer. Her books were bestsellers, and many of her readers believed that her stories were based on real events. But only she knew the truth about the origin of her inspiration. The legend of the cursed portrait continued to be told for generations, and the abandoned mansion remained as a reminder of the power of obsession and the consequences of defying the unknown. And those who dared to venture through those dark corridors knew that the gaze of the young woman in the portrait could be fatal.